There are events that have changed the course of humanity forever, but few have left a mark as deep as the Black Death, the plague that swept through the Middle Ages. This was not merely a period of illness, it was a true test of survival and a harsh lesson in coexisting with an invisible enemy. How did people in those times face this silent plague that claimed millions of lives without distinction? What methods did they use to understand this hidden evil, and how did life continue, albeit cautiously and despairingly, under the shadow of death looming over every village and city? In this documentary, we will calmly dive into the heart of that dark era. We will explore how the disease spread, the prevailing beliefs about it, and the ways doctors and ordinary people attempted to confront it. We will examine the profound social and economic changes it caused, and how it altered humanity's view of life and death. In the mid-14th century, specifically in 1347, a strange specter began casting its shadow over Asia, before slowly and silently creeping toward Europe. At that time, no one knew that this unwelcome visitor, later known as the Black Death, would change the world forever, claiming millions of lives in a horrifying silence. The outbreak is believed to have originated in the steppes of Central Asia, where the disease was endemic among certain rodents and the fleas that fed on them. With the flourishing of trade routes, such as the Silk Road linking east and west, these same routes became pathways for the plague. Trade caravans transporting goods from distant parts of Asia to the Black Sea also carried infected rats and their fleas, unknowingly spreading the disease. The plague reached Europe for the first time through the city of Kaffa on the Crimean Peninsula, which was under Mongol siege. Historical accounts describe how the besieged Mongols, already infected, hurled the bodies of plague victims over the city walls as a primitive form of biological warfare. From there, Italian traders, especially from Genoa, fled across the Mediterranean, carrying the disease to ports such as Pisa, Venice, and Genoa. From these coastal cities, the plague spread like wildfire. Ships carrying goods and people also carried infected rats and fleas, the true agents behind the catastrophe. The spread was initially slow, then accelerated with human movement and trade. With no understanding of the disease or its transmission, the plague struck cities one after another with terrifying silence, sparing neither rich nor poor, young nor old. Its symptoms appeared suddenly and violently, swollen, painful lymph nodes signaling imminent death, often striking swiftly without warning. When the plague hit a city or village, the horror was not only the staggering death toll, but also the nature of the disease itself and its abrupt, terrifying symptoms, leaving families and communities in shock and helplessness against sudden death. The most common and dreaded sign was the appearance of painful swellings called buboes, from the Latin word meaning swelling. These appeared in the lymph nodes, particularly in the groin, armpits, or neck, starting small, but enlarging to the size of an egg or even an apple, turning a dark bluish red or black, hence the name Black Death. These buboes were extremely painful, and their appearance often extinguished any hope of survival. Alongside the buboes, patients suffered high fever, chills, intense headaches, and general weakness. Nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea were also common, accelerating the rapid deterioration of the patient. The disease advanced with terrifying speed, often killing within days, sometimes in less than 24 hours. The plague manifested in several forms, each a different face of silent death. In addition to bubonic plague, there was pneumonic plague, which attacked the lungs, causing violent, bloody coughing and spreading directly through the air, making it even more lethal and fast-moving. There was also septicemic plague, affecting the blood directly, causing internal bleeding and skin discoloration, and considered the deadliest of all. These horrifying and fast-spreading symptoms, for which medieval medicine had no explanation or effective treatment, turned the plague into an unprecedented human catastrophe. Bustling cities became silent, and people were pushed to the brink of despair in an age when human understanding of disease was extremely limited. When the plague struck Europe with its destructive force, people faced a catastrophe they could not rationally explain. In this atmosphere of fear and ignorance, humanity turned to prevailing beliefs, seeking meaning in the face of this silent death. The most common explanation, embraced by clergy and lay people alike, was that the plague was divine punishment. People believed this epidemic was heaven's wrath upon human sins, sent to purify the world of evil. This belief led to waves of mass repentance, constant prayer, and even the emergence of groups like the Flagellants, who publicly whipped themselves in the streets, hoping to appease the Creator and lift the plague. Others sought natural explanations, though far from accurate. Some thought the disease spread through bad air, poisonous vapors rising from swamps or decomposing corpses. This belief led people to burn aromatic herbs, carry incense, and even block their noses with cloth soaked in vinegar, desperately attempting to purify the air of this unseen evil. Stranger theories emerged as well. Some believe the plague resulted from specific alignments of the planets and stars, or even poisons deliberately placed in wells by certain groups, which sometimes triggered waves of violence and persecution against minorities. In this confusion and fear, any explanation, no matter how far from reality, offered a glimmer of hope, or at least a scapegoat. This silent search for meaning in the face of unknown death reflects humanity's despair in confronting a catastrophe unlike any other. People had nothing but faith or superstition as their only shield in facing the Black Death, whose nature they did not understand. Reactions in the Middle Ages varied between despair, flight, and desperate attempts at treatment and isolation. Every response, however, reflected humanity's silent struggle to survive an unforgiving plague. For many, flight was the first instinct. The wealthy and powerful, upon noticing the first signs of disease in a city, would flee to isolated rural estates or to cities not yet touched by the plague. They believed that by doing so, they could escape the bad air carrying the disease, leaving behind the poor and laborers to face their fate. While understandable as a survival instinct, this flight also contributed to spreading the disease to new regions and fractured the social fabric of stricken cities. Those who remained in infected cities pursued different strategies in a desperate attempt at survival. Some physicians, despite their limited knowledge, tried treatments using herbal remedies, steam cleansing, or even bloodletting, which often weakened patients further. These attempts were usually ineffective, yet they reflected a deep desire to resist. Meanwhile, isolation emerged as a practical response. People began confining the sick to their homes, marking doors with distinct signs to warn others to stay away. Some cities imposed quarantines on incoming ships, requiring vessels and crews to wait outside the harbor for up to 40 days in a desperate effort to prevent the disease from entering. The plague radically altered social life. Fear of infection caused family breakdowns. Neighbors avoided each other, and many dead were left unburied due to the lack of people available to perform the task. Yet amid this despair, stories of silent humanity emerged. Individuals risking their lives to help others, or clergy remaining to provide final rites, proving that the human spirit could find light even in the darkest, quietest circumstances. As the plague spread widely, existing institutions could no longer cope with the sheer number of dead. In every town and village, corpses accumulated faster than they could be buried, creating a horrifying scene of death's silence everywhere. A logistical and human challenge unprecedented in history. Churches and cemeteries, traditional burial sites, quickly filled to capacity. There was no room for more bodies, nor enough people to conduct proper funerals. Death became a daily routine. Religious rituals that were once performed with care were shortened or skipped entirely. In this tragic reality, cities had to take painful, extraordinary measures. Mass graves were dug, often outside city walls, where hundreds or even thousands of bodies were dumped daily, sometimes in multiple layers, covered with soil and lime to limit the spread of infection and odor. Transporting the dead was a dangerous and horrifying task, usually carried out by the lower classes or those who had lost everything. Working in silent despair to haul carts of corpses through deserted streets, a grim part of daily life in plague-stricken cities. Burial was not the only challenge. The living suffered as well. Families who lost members had no opportunity for traditional mourning or farewells. Fear of infection prevented touching loved ones, and social courtesies disappeared, leaving individuals isolated with their grief. These silent mass graves, holding countless victims, stand as a grim testament to the true scale of the catastrophe. They remind us that the plague was not just a disease, but a force that changed how people dealt with life and death, leaving a profound silence that resonates even today. The effects of the plague extended beyond the staggering human loss, causing deep social and economic transformations across medieval Europe. Amid the quiet of mass graves, old social structures slowly crumbled and new concepts emerged. One notable change was the acute labor shortage. With the deaths of vast numbers of peasants, workers, and artisans, those who survived were suddenly in high demand. This sudden shift in power gave lower classes unprecedented influence. Peasants, previously tied to the land, could now demand higher wages, better working conditions, or move in search of better opportunities elsewhere. The labor shortage also contributed to the collapse of some old feudal systems. Agricultural lands that required many workers went fallow, and wealthy lords were forced to make concessions to peasants or convert fields to livestock pastures, which demanded less labor, fundamentally altering the agricultural economy. In cities, guilds lost influence, as the death of skilled artisans created opportunities for newcomers, reducing restrictions on entry into trades that were once the preserve of certain families or classes. Psychologically and socially, contradictory changes emerged. while despair and anxiety grew in the face of imminent death. Some people clung to life more boldly, indulging in worldly pleasures, while others turned to intense religiosity or sought profound spiritual answers. The plague reshaped the face of medieval Europe from within. It was not a transient epidemic, but a silent force that restructured societies, altered class relationships, and left a legacy whose effects lasted for centuries. Amid the catastrophe of the Black Death, certain people had to confront the disease face to face in its most terrifying form: the physicians. They lacked scientific understanding and effective treatments, yet in silent despair, they attempted to ease the suffering of patients and explain a phenomenon beyond their capabilities. Medieval physicians relied heavily on ancient theories, such as the concept of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, which linked the disease to an imbalance of these fluids within the body. According to this theory, treatment focused on attempting to restore balance through methods such as bloodletting, cupping, and the use of medicinal herbs and plants. With the emergence of the plague, these physicians were forced to innovate new methods, primitive and largely ineffective. Some tried to lance the painful swellings, known as buboes, to drain what they believed were toxins from the body, a procedure that often worsened the patient's condition and frequently led to fatal complications. Strange clothing also appeared for plague doctors in some regions, though in the later stages of the outbreak. These outfits consisted of a long, thick coat and a mask shaped like a bird's beak, filled with aromatic herbs, along with a long stick used to examine patients without touching them directly. The purpose of these garments was to provide supposed protection from the bad air believed to carry the disease and to keep away insects that might transmit it. Despite the enormous risks and their limited knowledge, these doctors provided an invaluable service to society. They were the only ones daring to approach the dead and the sick at a time when families and friends abandoned their loved ones out of fear of contagion. They were silent witnesses to the scale of the catastrophe and the suffering of thousands. The stories of plague doctors, full of despair, courage, and ignorance, remind us of the fragility of human knowledge in the face of nature's power, yet also tell of humanity's persistence in seeking healing and hope, even in the darkest and quietest circumstances. The plague was not merely a medical or social event. It was a profound existential experience that affected every aspect of life, including the arts. Under the shadow of the Black Death that loomed over Europe for many years, art transformed from a medium for expressing beauty and sanctity into a mirror reflecting horror, despair, and increasing contemplation of mortality. A new motif emerged in art during this period, known as the Dance of Death. This depicted death as a skeletal or ghostly figure leading people of all social classes, kings, peasants, clergy, and knights, in a collective dance toward the grave. This form of art served as a silent, deadly reminder that death discriminates against no one, and that the fate of mortality unites all humans, regardless of rank. Church murals and cemetery sculptures began to depict Christ and the saints in darker, grimmer ways, reflecting growing human suffering. Bright colors vanished, replaced by darker, more somber tones with a focus on portraying pain, loss, and human weakness when confronted with an uncontrollable force. The impact was not limited to visual art. Music and poetry were deeply affected as well. and musical compositions expressed sorrow, loss, and supplication for mercy, while poetry reflected on mortality, the fleeting nature of life, and anxieties about salvation. These works became a silent record of the tragedies people endured, capturing their grief and hope in a time when death was closer than ever. Even after the major waves of the plague subsided, its impact on art persisted for centuries. The epidemic changed how artists viewed life and death and humanity's place in the universe. It left a unique artistic legacy that silently communicates the consequences of the great catastrophe, demonstrating how profound suffering can inspire creativity that endures across generations, telling the story of mortality and survival. Once the great waves of the plague subsided in Europe, and memories of death and destruction gradually faded from daily life, the epidemic had nevertheless left a silent legacy, influencing many aspects of life and society in unexpected ways, and paving the way for radical changes in human understanding of disease and health. Medically, although effective treatment for the plague would not appear for centuries, the harsh experience prompted new concepts. The idea of quarantining the sick and travelers from infected regions, which arose during the crisis, became a core element of epidemic control strategies later on. Some cities also established health councils, primitive public health systems, to manage the spread of disease in the future. Economically and socially, the severe population loss caused major shifts. Labor became more valuable, and the living conditions of peasants and workers gradually improved as they gained the ability to negotiate wages and rights. This change weakened the old feudal system and paved the way for more flexible social classes, opening prospects for future economic developments. Philosophically and spiritually, the plague had a profound effect. On one hand, it led people to question prevailing beliefs, especially when prayers or rituals failed to stop the deaths. On the other, it encouraged a deeper search for understanding of life and death, increasing interest in spiritual and philosophical aspects of human existence. Art reflected this shift in perspective toward mortality and life. The silent legacy of the plague goes beyond numbers and statistics. It is part of humanity's collective memory. It reminds us of nature's irresistible power and of humanity's ability to endure and adapt, even in the harshest conditions. The Black Death was a harsh lesson, but it also became a catalyst for many developments that altered the course of history, laying the groundwork for a new era, more aware of the importance of health, hygiene, and flexible social systems. Although centuries have passed since the Black Death struck Europe, the lessons humanity learned from that great catastrophe still resonate today, like silent whispers from the past, casting shadows over our present and future. Understanding the plague and how people confronted it provides valuable insights into managing modern epidemics. One of the most important lessons is the value of scientific knowledge and proper understanding of disease. In the Middle Ages, ignorance of the nature of the epidemic was the disease's strongest weapon. Today, with advances in science and medicine, we can identify pathogens, understand how diseases spread, and develop vaccines and treatments that were once unimaginable. This enormous progress highlights the importance of scientific research, which advances quietly within laboratories. The experience of the plague also emphasized the significance of public health and hygiene. Primitive practices of isolation and quarantine, although simple, were early attempts to to break the chain of infection. Today, modern sanitation systems, clean water access, and personal and public hygiene programs provide strong protection against disease, a silent legacy of that crisis. The plague also exposed the fragility of social systems, revealing the need for resilient structures to withstand future epidemics. Socially and economically, the plague revealed how an epidemic could upend balances, alter class relationships, and reshape priorities. It encourages us today to think about building more resilient and just societies, capable of withstanding future crises and addressing them calmly and wisely. Finally, the stories of the plague remind us of humanity's resilience and hope. Amid despair and death, tales emerged of cooperation, sacrifice, and the search for meaning in life. They teach us that despite all challenges, humanity possesses the capacity to adapt, learn from mistakes, and move forward toward a better future. The silent story of the plague in the Middle Ages is not just a tale from the past. It is a living lesson for all of us, reminding us that vigilance, knowledge, and cooperation are key to confronting the unknown and maintaining calm in the face of storms, however silent or destructive they may be. Amid the catastrophe that swept through the Middle Ages, the plague was not just numbers and mortality statistics. It was a profound human experience, weaving countless stories of courage and fear, selfishness and sacrifice, despair and hope. These are the echoes of survival, still resonating silently in ancient records. In every town and village, there were those who chose to stay and confront fate. Some clergy, such as priests and monks, refused to flee their communities, remaining to provide final rites to the dying and recite prayers over the dead, even at the cost of their own lives. These were silent, heroic acts, demonstrating unwavering devotion and faith. There were also stories of ordinary people displaying unexpected bravery. Mothers stayed with their sick children until the end, despite knowing the risk of infection. Neighbors helped each other bring food and water to the isolated sick, prioritizing human bonds over fear of disease. At the same time, there were tales of humanity's darker side during crises. Individuals who betrayed their families or abandoned loved ones to their fate. Thieves exploiting the chaos to loot the homes of the dead, or charlatans selling false remedies to the desperate. These painful stories remind us of the immense psychological pressure epidemics place on the human spirit and how they reveal both the best and worst in people. Even after the crisis ended, the impact of these stories remained engraved in collective memory for generations. Elders recounted to their grandchildren tales of the Black Death, how they survived or lost loved ones. This oral tradition, though altered over time, preserved part of the memory of suffering and resilience. Exploring these often silent and unknown human stories gives us deeper insight into what it means to coexist with catastrophe. It reminds us that history is not written only by the great. It is also shaped by the endurance, courage, despair, and hope of ordinary individuals, even under the darkest clouds of silent death. Confronting a catastrophe of the magnitude of the Black Death was not a struggle of the body alone. It extended to the mind and spirit. The philosophical and religious foundations of medieval society were deeply shaken, prompting quiet. Religious institutions were directly and tangibly affected. Many clergy, priests, and monks died while aiding the sick or performing burial rites, creating a severe shortage of spiritual leaders. This, combined with diminished trust in the efficacy of prayer or rituals to stop the plague, led some to question traditional religious authority. Conversely, the epidemic also intensified the religiosity of others, who saw it as a sign of the impending end of the world or a call for personal and collective repentance. Movements such as the wandering penitents, literally translated as the flagellants, emerged. They traveled between cities, publicly whipping themselves, believing that physical pain would atone for sins and appease God to lift the plague. These movements reflected people's despair and search for radical solutions to problems beyond their understanding. Philosophers and thinkers faced a profound challenge: how to interpret such harsh fate. Was it punishment or a test? Silent debates unfolded in the few surviving universities and in individual minds about the nature of evil, the place of divine justice, and the value of human life in the face of widespread mortality. Though these contemplations did not yield immediate answers, they became the seed for later intellectual developments. This harrowing experience prompted a reassessment of human values. Amid death hovering over all, life became more precious to survivors. People's views of wealth and power changed, and awareness of life's brevity increased, leading to behaviors ranging from religious devotion to indulgence in worldly pleasures. The plague's impact on religious and philosophical thought was profound and lasting. This silent death forced humanity to confront its deepest existential questions and search for meaning and salvation during a time of disaster, leaving a legacy of ideas that shaped human thought for centuries to come. After years of terror, destruction, and silence over villages and cities, and after claiming millions of lives, the plague's relentless waves gradually subsided. The catastrophe did not vanish overnight, but the death toll began to decrease. Slowly, the sounds of life pierced the silence of death, signaling the beginning of a new phase of recovery and revival. The return of life was slow and painful. Cities were partially abandoned, fields lay fallow, and communities were torn apart by heavy losses. Yet human resilience prevailed. After a period of shock, survivors began to rebuild what the epidemic had destroyed. Economically, the massive population decline radically reshaped the labor market. With fewer workers, wages increased, and peasants and laborers gained far greater bargaining power than before the plague. This initially silent change gradually led to deep, long-term social and economic transformations, contributing to the decline of the feudal system and the emergence of new social classes. In agriculture, some lands that previously relied on dense labor were converted into pastures, altering food production patterns. The need to rebuild cities and villages also fostered growth in certain crafts. Over time, communities began regaining confidence and organizational capacity, enacting new laws and regulations for public hygiene, market organization, and even handling the dead more safely. Though primitive by today's standards, these measures were the first steps toward a deeper understanding of public health. Life after the plague did not return entirely to what it had been. This profound experience altered people's views on life, death, values, and society, though the catastrophe's effects remained etched in memory for centuries. The ability to rise from the ashes and rebuild life silently and determinedly was the strongest and most important message of this painful historical period.